Hello everybody, this is a follow-up video to mixing Mach1 Spatial within Bitwig. Mach1 Spatial is an 8-channel file format which makes working with it in Bitwig, which is a stereo DAW, 2 channels, a bit of a challenge, and I've been looking at ways to do this within Bitwig as workarounds. If you've watched the previous video, you'll have seen that essentially the workaround is to loop around through jack audio so that we can get the 8 outputs from the Mach1 panners back round into Bitwig to a kind of pseudo 8-channel bus, which is really 4 stereo pairs, to emulate the lack of a multi-channel bus or track in Bitwig. This works quite well, really. The downside is you can't export the audio offline, so you're working a little bit like a studio with outboard gear, and you physically gotta stream the audio and record it in real time. So any glitches or CPU issues, etc., they can end up in the recording. So it's always nice to offline render or export, because it's not dependent on the performance of your computer. So with that said, the challenge is how to get 8 channels working within Bitwig without using jack, so that we keep all of the audio routing within Bitwig, within the kind of Bitwig project. That way you don't need jack, you don't need external VST hosts for the monitor. The objective is to get all of this running within Bitwig. If you're familiar with kind of the Bitwig VST IO, if I show you an example, there's this piano track playing in the background. If we look at the M1 panner, Bitwig allows these things called multi-out chain selectors. That's really just the multi-channel output from a plugin, and it'll allow as many as the VST format allows, I believe. So getting the 8 channels out of the Mach1 panner, which is this VST here, this is running in this host plugin called Krushview Element. I'll get onto that later, but it allows a little bit more flexibility, because Bitwig's not aware of multi-channel plugins in any sort of controlled sense. So it helps me get these 8, or rather 4 stereo pairs kind of just neat and tidy, and I don't have to mess around with splitting and joining mono and stereo. Anyway, we'll get back to that. So the limitation, the whole reason we can't work in multi-channel in Bitwig is because it only allows a single stereo input as a sidechain, basically. if it allowed multiple side chains, we'd be laughing, because every sound source on the track is always going to be mono or stereo. It's just that we can only get stereo or 2 channels to go anywhere as a combined sort of multi-track. So we work around this. The workaround in this, which is available as a template if you want to download it, is I've settled on using a group track with, by default, usually it's show group track content, because traditionally you're just using it as like as a bus, as a sub. If we switch to using show master track content, we can actually use the group tracks as if it's an instrument or audio track. And so here we've got a group track with some MIDI notes on it, and that's triggering this sampler and playing the piano-y chords that you can hear in the background. That ends up entering the Mach1 panner, and I'll just open that up. That enters the Mach1 panner as the stereo pair, and then the Mach1 panner takes that stereo, spreads it out into the room according to how you've panned it, and then those 8 channels come out here. Those 8 channels then I'll get into more detail on this as well later. They essentially come through to this other group track, which contains 4 stereo pairs, and you can see, even though there's nothing visible in terms of what Bitwig's aware of, the audio is coming through to these tracks from the panners and from all panners. This template, I've built 26 tracks, just so I can I don't have to set this up each time, and each source stem or track also has its 8 outputs, and that is where the routing from here to here happens. So each track basically just outputs its panner outputs to the Mach1 Spatial bus here. What I'll do is, just to demonstrate, there's only two tracks playing at the moment. I'll just enable the rest of these tracks and just do a little bit of sort of spatial panning on each, and then we'll come back and look at adding effects and how you would offline render or offline export from Bitwig. So I'm just going to turn the music up a bit, turn my mic off, and then we'll see where we're at after that's done. Okay, so that was just messing around, really, doing some panning. So that's essentially the approach you can take. And every panner is on each track, outputting itself to Mach1 Spatial sub-bus. On the master, this really works just like a stereo master. It's just that we placed an effects layer that kind of splits this 8-channel spatial bus into the upper 4 and lower 4 channels, and within each layer is an audio receiver taking the first 2 channels, and then the Mach1 monitor taking the second 2 pairs, channels 3 and 4 or 7 and 8, in order to get the 4 inputs into the monitor. Typically you would have all 8 going into the monitor, but we can't do that in Bitwig. We're limited to 2 main ins and a side chain in. But by splitting it into the upper and lower and then duplicating the monitor, we've essentially dealt with it. So here's 5, 6, 7 and 8 going into its monitor, and it doesn't go into 1, 2, 3, 4 because that's already happening in this instance. So we're just using 2 instances to get around the problem. The monitor's not really part of the final Mach1 Spatial mix as such. It's just so that you can hear kind of a spatial representation of what you're doing, rather than just folding it directly down to stereo. The monitors do actually have they have what's called a stereo safe, which is kind of like a fold down, I guess. Or you can limit it to just the horizon. But Mach1 Spatial default sounds actually really nice on especially on headphones, but it seems to work pretty well out of just 2 speakers as well. So that's the master chain output. You wouldn't really do anything much with this. I just keep an eye on some levels, and I'll just put a peak limiter on the end just to protect my ears if anything gets out of hand. So that's the monitoring, listening side. What I'm going to do is, if I just solo this lead here. Unfortunately, solo and mute doesn't really behave due to the grouping. You can kind of work with just soloing everything and then to mute something, unsoloing it, but you can't just have everything playing and then mute specific tracks, unfortunately. But you can if you right click and mute the physical track, the clip itself. So I'm just going to turn this up a little bit. So there's this lead sound playing. It's just dry, but I have set up a reverb here. This is again a group track with 4 stereo pairs, 1 to 8. If I enable this, there's another effects layer dealing with the top of that and the bottom. We'll enable that, and you should be able to hear that there's some reverb on that. Oh, can't do it that way. I'll just turn off each reverb instant. So yeah, so that's dry. There's the reverb. So it's exactly like the panner, really. We're just splitting out with the audio receiver, side chain in, and then in this case I'm using cinematic rooms. So the input levels are on the left here. That's what it's outputting. If I get both of these up, so this is the lower, this is the upper, and then if I pan this track here, you should see. So if I rotate this fully around to the right, you can see we've got an emphasis on the right input channels here. So this is the upper kind of reverb, this is the lower reverb, and the cinematic rooms has detected that we're feeding it 4 channels. This is where Krushview Element VST host really comes in handy, because you can select what kind of bus format you want this plugin to run in. It's really quite flexible. So in this case, quadraphonic works quite well with Mach1 Spatial, because you've got four upper channels, 4 lower channels. And likewise, if I just pull this round to the front again, if I pan that right to the top of the room, you can see there's signal in the top reverb, but there isn't in the bottom reverb, because essentially we've panned out of the bottom of the room entirely. Then likewise, if you put it down to the bottom, you've only got the bottom reverb. So it's a kind of a 3-dimensional movement, and as you rotate around the room, you can kind of emulate where the object is, and that translates well into the reverb as well. So yeah, so that's pretty cool, and kind of an accepted workflow for spatial reverbs. Let's just get rid of all of this. Just gonna turn this down a bit. Obviously, this reverb is acting a bit like an insert, because it's only taking this Moog lead track. If you wanted to use this more like a send effects, I think the way you'd have to do it would be to put an effects grid at the start of this group, this reverb group, and then from there you could bring in side chains from all the tracks that you wanted to effectively send a signal to apply reverb on. So in this case, we're taking it from this Moog lead, but if I wanted a Tom's loop to be, I'll take 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, and bring that into the wet effects on those reverbs. So it's a bit of an inconvenience that you can't just tweak a send knob, but it is what it is. And if you've got if you've got the resources on the computer, you can get away with using inserts anyway. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. The only other thing is to export this offline. So if we just stop this, let's unmute all of those tracks. So when we go to File, Export Audio, you can select a subset of tracks. So I'm going to select a Mach1 Spatial submix bus. I've got my loop region set as the from and to range. It doesn't really matter pre-fader, post-fader, because everything's at unity gain, I think. So if we just click OK on that, and I'm just going to export it to this folder. I've got some files in there already, so I'll just overwrite those. And that's now going to offline render this to 4 stereo files, essentially. No different than working in just a stereo master. Okay, and there's our four Mach1 Spatial channels. If I just look at media info on that, my computer's beginning to hang a little bit with OBS running as well. So we've got a 2-channel PCM. It's at the same sample rate as the project. And if you watched the previous video, you know that you can combine those into a single 8-channel Mach1 Spatial file and then transcode that to other formats using the Mach1 Spatial transcoder. So I think that's covered what I wanted to cover with a kind of mind's eye to working offline. It is more resource hungry because for every track that you're working on, you've really got an additional four tracks to handle the Mach1 Spatial side. But it is what it is in Bitwig. We haven't got multi-track buses or multi-channel buses, so this is the workaround, and it's actually working quite well, I think. Once it's set up as a template, you really just treat each of these group tracks just as if it's a MIDI or audio track, and deal with things that way. Yep, I think that's it. Still trying to get around to transcoding Mach1 Spatial to 7.1.4 Dolby Atmos, but I think there's an issue with the transcoder at the moment. But I think Mach1 have got quite a lot in the in progress in terms of the entire system. So we'll see where that goes. But I'd love to get a Mach1 Spatial mix transcoded to Dolby Atmos and uploaded to the streaming services. We did a little bit of work on messing about with kind of fitting the Mach1 Spatial format within a Dolby Atmos ADM master file. So there's definitely some fun to be had there as well. But that's for another day. This is just another template workaround for mixing Mach1 Spatial in a stereo DAW and specifically Bitwig. I'll make this template available. It won't have the stems in there, but it'll be set up, ready to go. You will need either Krushview Element or to replace Krushview Element with one of your choice, like Plug Bejewel or I think it's DDMF, Blue Cat Audio. In my opinion, Krushview is actually the nicest and seems to be the most lightweight. When you consider we've got quite a lot running. We've got one running on every track, and all four of the multi-channel in each effect. So it seems to be working quite well, and it handles delay compensation and all that sort of stuff. So all good. Anyway, that's it. Take care. Bye.